Eugene, is there any kind of specific training you can just shed light on that's done during these courses? Okay. And I guess also just in terms of the awareness that's created, I mean, just looking at some of the stats, 1.4 million crashes a year due to drivers using cell phones, for example, that kind of thing.
Well, there's a couple of things. And if you had to say to me, Eugene, what are the, and let's call it 7 key features that you should take away from here. An increased awareness of what you're doing. When you're there driving, please drive. It's not an entertainment center, although we do, and I'm not criticizing the fact that people have music in their cars, etc. But think about sometimes you're driving down the road and you can hear a guy coming from 10 blocks away. Now, there are several senses that we employ, and we must remember that. It's the visual, audio, and sometimes when you hear those big rock thumping things, you feel it in the seat of your pants. You can feel if you're stretching your car beyond the room. Inadequate following distance. You know, so when there's a pile-up on the highway in front of you, and you're not keeping your eyes, we should be actually looking, and this is what viewers can look at it, you should be driving 12 to 15 seconds ahead of you. That's where you should be looking, not at the stoplights in the car in front of you, because your peripheral vision will allow you to take cognizance of that if there's an incident that causes the vehicle to slow down. So you will be proactive. The fact that people, when they drive, are distracted, and this, you mentioned that figure, you know, in the States, 25% of crashes are attributed to the use of cell phone. Now, when legislation was promulgated in South Africa, we didn't have apps, SMSs and the like. So it was pretty clear, don't engage with a cell phone unless it's hands-free. But the research shows now that even that is patently unsafe. But just go back a moment. Think of people SMSing and the temptation, and I could share with you stats from a part of the world, people just cannot refrain from looking at that SMS that's just come through. The moment you do, now you take your eyes off the road for 2 seconds. If you're traveling at 60 k's an hour, you've traveled like 50 meters. A lot can happen in that. Think of what people do as well. It's now Facebook, various apps. You're driving down the road and you look at the person next to you, come to a stop, and they're on their phone. Now think about that in the context of hijacking. Many hijackings take place at intersections. And so often drivers will say, he, and I'm using the word he to be pretty generic, came from nowhere. He didn't come from nowhere, you just didn't see where he came from. So refrain from using the cell phone. And then of course there's those all important things, buckle up. And don't let's use this excuse that, you know what, I read of an incident of somebody when their car went into the dam and they couldn't get out because they had a seatbelt. The incidence of seatbelt saving lives far exceeds the very minuscule amount where a person has been trapped in the car. Don't let that be a reason for it. And then the other thing is people are inclined to use seatbelt. They say, no, I've got my airbag. You know. That airbag deploys at over 300 kilometers an hour. If you've been smacked by Mike Tyson, which is clearly you haven't been, all right? But if you were, you would know what 300 kilometers an hour is. So it's SRS implies supplementary restraint system. And then of course there's the thing, every car today has all the wonderful technology, ABS. But in the olden days, and you talk olden days, before technology was available, people drove more defensively because they didn't rely on technology to protect them. And I use a typical example. If I were training you and you say to me, Eugene, you know, I buy whatever particular brand of car because it's got ABS, EBD, and all of these wonderful things. And then your company is a bit schnips, you see. The economy is cutting back. So when you come to Joburg, Durban, something, you take a rental car, and it may not have ABS. Now think of going down Deval Drive here, and if you were driving and you thought you could now brake the way you braked in your BMW, you'd suddenly find that the laws of physics are not going to be controlled or managed with technology, and therefore we have a crash. But you say, but you know, I attended this advanced driving course. And then of course, when we're driving in bad weather, the circumstances are not the same. You know, here's another, make sure that your tires are adequate for the drive that you do. You know, you have treads on your thing, not to make the tire look fancy, but it's there, and there's a minimum amount that you should have that's in order to disperse water. So when you're driving, but except that you're still driving on a film of liquid, increase the following distance, but you'll see the average driver. Now they want to see what's happening in front, so they close the distance. Where's the mentality in that? And then, of course, if you think, and this is something that we've been advocating for a long time, drive nice, it's contagious. So instead of seeing that taxi driver as a threat, and here's something that is really controversial, I believe that most taxi drivers are better drivers than you and I, notwithstanding what I do. Tell me if this doesn't make sense. A taxi driver who can drive at 120 kilometers an hour with a vice grip as a steering wheel, it's got to be pretty good. I'm not saying he's a safe driver, all right? So our challenge in interacting with taxi guys is to teach them how to interact with other motorists whose values and norms are different to theirs. But having said that, you drive down the road and you've made a mistake and you need to get back into the traffic. Who's the first one that will let you in? It's probably the taxi driver, because he knows what it's like.
He's always cutting in, yeah.
He's always. So if we adopt this attitude of driving nicely, and you'll see this in Europe, you get onto an on-ramp and the traffic makes way for you. You know, they give you a gap. In South Africa, we attempt to cut you out. So we close the gap. So if we did some very simple, basic things, we would not have the cost of the country in terms of lives. And here's the shocker. It costs us, the fiscus, about 300 billion a year because of road crashes and fatalities. If some of that were taken and plowed back into education, health services, we wouldn't have half the issues that we have today. Of course, and I still think we would have a viable business, even though we would make a difference to people's lives.